US and India vowed to push for a new trade agreement as Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met US President Donald Trump at the White House. Now, President Trump said that he and Indian Prime Minister Modi have agreed to start talks to address the long-running disparities in trade. Trump announced that the United States will sell F-35 fighter jets to India, which would join the elite club of countries with the state-of-the-art stealth planes.
Starting this year, we'll be increasing military sales to India by many billions of dollars. We're also paving the way to ultimately provide India with the F-35 stealth fighters. Today, I'm pleased to announce that my administration has approved the extradition of one of the plotters and one of the very evil people of the world, and having to do with the horrific 2008 Mumbai terrorist attack, to face justice in India. So he's going to be going back to India to face justice.
Addressing a joint press conference with the US President, Prime Minister Modi said that Washington and New Delhi are pushing to conclude a mutually beneficial trade agreement. Prime Minister Modi said that in order to ensure India's energy security, they will focus on trade in oil and gas. Investment in energy infrastructure will also increase in the area of nuclear energy. Prime Minister Modi also said that India was fully prepared to take back Indians living in the US illegally. More than 725,000 immigrants from India are in the US without authorization, the third most of any country after Mexico and El Salvador. US is deporting illegal Indian immigrants with the second such flight to arrive in India on Saturday.
सवाल सिर्फ भारत का नहीं है, वैश्विक रूप से हम इस मत के हैं कि गैर कानूनी तरीके से जो लोग दूसरे देशों में होते हैं उनको वहां रहने का कोई कानूनी अधिकार तो है नहीं। जहां तक भारत और अमेरिका का सवाल है, हमने हमेशा कहा है कि जो वेरीफाइड होगा, कि जो सच्चे अर्थ में भारत का ही नागरिक होगा, वो अगर अमेरिका में गैर कानूनी तरीके से रहता है तो उसको वापस लेने के लिए भारत तैयार है।
Modi, only the fourth world leader to visit the White House since Trump's return, described the US president as a friend and told him he was adopting a take on his Make America Great Again slogan.
अमेरिका की भाषा में कहूं तो विकसित भारत का मतलब मेक इंडिया ग्रेट अगेन, यानी मिगा। जब अमेरिका और भारत साथ मिलकर काम करते हैं, यानी मागा, मागा प्लस मिगा, तब बन जाता है मेगा पार्टनरशिप फॉर प्रॉस्पेरिटी। और यही मेगा स्पिरिट।
Trump, on the other hand, said that US will be increasing military sales to India by many billions of dollars, adding that it will be paving the way to ultimately provide India with the F-35 stealth fighters. Trump said that he found a special bond with Modi and India and complimented Modi as being a much tougher negotiator than he is. Trump, who has previously complained about Indian tariffs, agreed with Modi that the two countries would work together on a trade deal.
Today, the U.S. Trade deficit with India is almost $100 billion. And Prime Minister Modi and I have agreed that we'll begin negotiations to address the long-running disparities that should have been taken care of over the last 4 years, but they didn't do that, in the U.S.-India trading relationship, with the goal of signing an agreement. And we want, we want a certain level playing field, which we really think we're entitled to. And he does also, in fairness. So we're going to work on that very hard.
All right, we're now cutting across to live visuals coming in. India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri is addressing a press conference at this point.
In previous years, on account of some of the legal provisions that have remained in place in India, have already begun to be addressed. You would have noticed the announcements that have been made in the budget in this regard. And we imagine that these progress on these issues will enable us to realize the promise of cooperation between India and the United States in this very important sector. A new partnership has been launched between the US National Science Foundation and the brand new Indian Anusandhan, which is the National Research Foundation, for deepening research linkages in critical and emerging technologies. There's an MOU that was signed between the NSF and the ANRF just a couple of days back to take forward this cooperation. On the people-to-people front, finally, you're aware there are nearly 300,000 Indian students studying in the United States, and the contribution of these students, especially to the US economy, was acknowledged in the joint statement. The leaders agreed to strengthen collaboration between higher education institutions of the two countries, and India invited the United States to take advantage of the reforms in the Indian education sector to set up offshore campuses of premier educational institutions of the US in India. They also committed to streamline avenues for legal mobility of students and professionals, and facilitating short-term tourist and business travel, while at the same time committing to aggressively addressing and tackling illegal immigration and human trafficking. I would also invite your attention to the parts of the joint statement where you can see a commitment from both sides to take decisive action.
All right, to discuss matters between US and India after Modi's trip to the White House at this point. For more on this, we are now being joined by Richard Rosso from Washington, D.C. He's a senior advisor and chair in US-India Policy Studies, CSIS, and managing director, McLarty Associates. Mr. Rosso, thank you so much for joining me here on the broadcast. Sir, let me just begin with one of the statements. There's lots to unpack from this meeting. At this point, Trump mentioned this, that the agreement on oil, the agreement for US to be India's #1 supplier of oil and natural gas. If you can elaborate a little further on what this will entail, and anywhere, any other eyes around the world which would be taking keen note on this at this point.
It's certainly a long road for us to replace India's traditional major providers of oil and gas. So will we get to #1? Well, we can estimate in the future as India's economic growth continues. Maybe the United States can get there, but it's going to take quite a bit of time. But we kind of expected that this would be on the table for this discussions. The United States has a 2-to-1 goods trade imbalance with India. And in terms of trying to press Prime Minister Modi to agree to buy more American products, there's two areas that are primarily in the government's bailiwick to be able to do that. Hydrocarbons as well as defense items, and both those were on the table. So becoming #1, it's a long road ahead to try to reach that, but not surprising at all to see that highlighted as one of the major areas to try to offset the trade imbalance.
Mr. Rosso, any other highlights from this meeting for you which stood out, which were beyond the basic ambit of what this meeting was going to be like? It's pretty much in line with what Trump has been saying all through his election campaign regarding the reciprocal tariffs. He's mentioned that enough number of times in the past as well. There were no surprises there at this point, but anything that for you which stood out regarding the relationship between US and India going forward?
I do think that as we haven't seen the joint statement, but we started to hear the foreign secretary articulating some of the points that weren't covered in the previous press interactions, and to talk about facilitating people-to-people contacts. We know that the Trump administration has been talking about being more restrictive on all forms of immigration, although for skilled workers, there's been some debate on that. So that surprised me a little bit. I can't wait to see what is actually articulated in the joint statement. The other that was announced during the press conference was the pathway for India to potentially be able to acquire the F-35, our most advanced fighter plane. There's been whispers in the corridors in Washington for years whether or not we'd ever put it on the table. India continuing to buy Russian equipment, particularly the S-400. There were concerns about operating these two systems in close proximity to each other. To put that in the path for potential options for export to India was very surprising as well. The other issues I think we all kind of assumed would be on the table to some extent, although it is good to see that some areas like talking about a trade agreement, we thought that might be on the table, and to see it articulated is good. So a few surprises, a few things that we'd hoped were in there that were, and I'm sure there's going to be a number of specific announcements in the joint statement on tariff reductions, things like that, to try to offset President Trump's aggressive approach on India in those areas.
Trump is aggressive in terms of his approach for this, and he's called Modi a tough negotiator, though it would have been a meeting with a lot of sparks there. But I just want to take it a little further from what you just mentioned in your response regarding the trade tariffs. There's a long-running disparity of trade and the trade gap negotiations. This is what was mentioned by Trump. This was after he announced the reciprocal tariffs. What does this entail? Do you find any kind of connect there, and how do you see this going forward?
A strange dance that we've got right now, because the United States has the largest trade deficit in terms of a pure number, but India actually has a significantly larger trade deficit when you think about it as a percentage of the economy. So the United States has a 2-to-1 trade deficit with India in goods trade and something similar in services trade. So I understand the instincts to push India, and I think India wanting to maintain trade relations with India, since we are India's largest export partner by far, double that of India's next largest export partner. India needs to work hard to make sure that the United States doesn't hit India hard on tariffs. So some accommodations we knew would be on the cards. But India can only go so far because, again, India's got an even larger trade deficit as a percent of the economy. So there's limits, I think, to how far India can be pushed. But keeping that open is very important. And I think we're going to see that there's at least some level of balance there. It started, of course, as was pointed out in the budget. India talking about capital goods and intermediate goods, motorcycles,
yes,
all issues that were covered in the budget just a couple of weeks ago. But we expect there'll be further announcements in the joint statement as well to try to accommodate. It's not only tariffs. Some of the areas that American companies have brought up before, India's adopted price controls, the new quality control orders, as well as a domestic manufacturing mandate. So some of the steps India may take may not even be tariffs, but other issues that have actually been a limitation on U.S. exports to India.
So there seem to be steps being taken to only solidify this relationship going forward. That seems to be a given regarding what has come out from this meeting. While we're still awaiting the joint communique and the joint statement from the two parties, we will need to wait and watch for that and then discuss it further. Thank you so much for joining me. That was Richard Rosso joining me from Washington, D.C.